This is a recreation and reimagining of a deck that I called the most sarcastic PowerPoint presentation ever. I didn't have a copy of the original deck, so I've recreated it as best I can. The original version of this deck was created when we were pretty early in Joplin development, and the decision was made that we were going to try to converge our tech stack between Mass Effect Andromeda and Dragon Age into a single storytelling and role-playing tech stack. Obviously, that didn't work out super great. I'm not sure if this will rise to the level of most sarcastic PowerPoint presentation ever, but my ears have been plugged up for a week and I'm pretty grouchy, so let's see what happens. To start with, let's compare two games. Let's just call them Game 1 and Game 2. The first game is a third-person over-the-shoulder game, but Game 2 is also. Game 1 is character-driven, as is Game 2. Game 1 has conversations, so does Game 2, and cutscenes, just like Game 2. Game 1 has an inventory screen, where you equip items onto your character and other characters, so does Game 2. Game 1 has different objects in the environment that you interact with and do different things with, just like Game 2. Game 1 has stats, and you level up and make your character stronger. Game 2 also has levels and stats. And there are a multitude of other things where Game 1 and Game 2 are the same. So let's talk about some things that are different. Well, Game 1 has a 4-person party. Game 2 has a 3-person squad. Game 1 is a melee game with ranged combat, and Game 2 is a ranged game that has some melee combat. So if it isn't obvious at this point, Game 1 is Dragon Age, and Game 2 is Mass Effect. Now, looking at these two lists, you might be wondering, man, I wonder how much technology Dragon Age and Mass Effect have shared. And the answer to that question is somewhere between 0 and not very much. Why isn't there a lot of tech sharing? Well, there are a multitude of reasons. I'm going to walk through some of them. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to tell you a story. So there's a dev, and that dev has an idea. They've got an idea for a feature that they're going to implement. And they start implementing it. And at first, things are going great. You have a lot of quick progress early on, and that feature is coming on super strong. But as things get further along, that early honeymoon period is over and things start to get a bit harder. And they're struggling, but they're still making progress. They keep working on that feature, but eventually the realities of shipping a game come in and they have to set the feature down. It isn't perfect, but it is good enough to ship a game. And at this point they may be thinking, well, it's not perfect, but at least the next team can finish the job, get it up past all those struggles, and make this feature truly amazing. So they ship the game and they go on vacation. And then the next project starts. And someone new comes along and they take a look at this feature and they look at it and it's like, why is this so terrible? I know we can do this right this time. We can do this better. But we just have to start again because they have an idea for a feature. Obviously fairly contrived, but that is very close to the reality of what often happens when teams are examining features created by teams that came before them. Why is that happening? Well, there's a lot of different reasons. When you look at something implemented by someone other than yourself, understanding how it works takes a lot of effort up front. Whereas imagining how amazing your implementation of the feature will be takes almost no effort at all. So at that first initial moment, your version seems easier than figuring out the feature that already exists. Now, that's not real. That's a trick your brain is playing on you. And that's a trick that's made so much worse if there is competition between teams or a disrespect of the ability of one team from the other team. A second reason is that the feature from the shipped game is often covered in warts and bits of tape and twine that were used to get it into a place that allowed it to ship. And that can make the feature look uglier than it actually is. The other common reason is because your project's needs and the needs of the project that came before aren't completely aligned. This misalignment can exaggerate the perception of deficiencies in the feature you're looking at, because the places that they took shortcuts might be exactly the places where you need the feature to be strongest. Let me give you an example. When you are implementing interactive objects, so things like doors, but also just things like switches and benches you can go up to and sit on, there are two philosophical approaches to this. The first, which is the way that the real world works, is that every actor in the world, all the party members and other creatures in the world, understand how to interact with the objects in the world. If I'm a human and I see a chair, I understand that's a chair. This is how I sit upon a chair. If I'm a horse and I see a chair, then my interaction might be that I kick a chair. The other way to implement interactive objects is to have the objects understand how the different actors work with them. So instead of having the human know how to sit on a chair, you would have the chair understand how to make a human sit upon it. And these approaches have advantages depending on what's exactly going to go into your game. If you have a relatively large number of interactive objects, but they're all of very similar behaviors, then it makes sense to have the actors understand how to act on things, because they can just keep everything loaded all the time, and they don't need to load that in when they encounter a new chair, because all the chairs are the same. This is also a good approach if you want different actors to have different behaviors. You want different animations for sitting for every single follower in your entire game. Then it makes sense to store that information on the character so that they know what they need to do and they don't need to know what everybody else needs to do. On the other hand, if you have a large variety of objects which have relatively different actions, even slightly different actions, so chairs of a bunch of different heights or a whole bunch of different interactive objects in the world that behave differently, then it can be more efficient to store that behavior inside the objects, because you only need to load the ones that are currently relevant and everything else can be out of memory and be more efficient. So which one is the right one for your game? This exact question is what often causes features to be re-implemented time and time again, even when you're talking about a feature that is very similar to the one that already exists. Because the answer to what's the right approach is, what do you already have? Because you can make either of these implementations work with what your game needs under almost all circumstances. The reality is that for object interactions, for most features, the bulk of the work is in getting them to function, getting the transitions to work, getting their interactions with other systems solid. If you discard something because at the edges of the feature it seems difficult to do what you want it to do, you're throwing out all of that incredible amount of work that was required to get anything working. When you look at a system that comes from a game that came before you, it has one feature that, for me, trumps all others. It shipped a game. Shipped is the best feature a system can have. And in almost all cases, it should trump almost all other conversations. But in the early days of a project, there is this temptation to look at something that was implemented with a difference of philosophy as being done wrong, and to decide that the right approach is to scrap that feature and to start again and to do it right this time. But by doing that, you spend a ton of effort ultimately getting back to approximately the same place. Mass Effect Andromeda and Dragon Age Inquisition both have inventory screens. Mass Effect Andromeda shares no code or design with the Dragon Age Age Inquisition inventory screen and spent an immense amount of work to ultimately arrive at almost exactly the same endpoint. As you can tell by the way that I'm speaking, I strongly believe in sharing between projects. Someone already did the work for you. Why are you doing it again just to get to basically the same place? Start with what they gave you and improve upon that. But ultimately, sharing only works under a few circumstances. You can have opportunistic sharing, where projects look for opportunities to scavenge features from the games that came before them. This works pretty much regardless of the situation you're in, assuming that the different projects are sharing their access to their asset depots. If you don't even have that much, then I guess you're on your own. Batten down the hatches and do your best. But opportunistic sharing isn't going to result in a lot of sharing actually occurring because there's no documentation and nothing has been done to pass the baton from one relay runner to the other. The baton is thrown upon the ground and you have to go into the grass to pick it up. Much better is to have the teams work together to plan the features that are important to each other. And this can help both projects because the features aren't perfectly aligned. The features that are more important to the project that comes next can get worked on while the first project is still in development, potentially helping the first project as well. But this only works if both projects are willing to play this game. If one team keeps trying to run in a relay race and every other person is just running a sprint alone, they are going to be spending effort that is wasted, and they reach out to pass the baton to the next racer and it's knocked out of their hand and they're left feeling like they were tricked. And eventually, if that's the situation, then that project needs to look up, scan the field, look at Lucy holding the football and say, screw you, Lucy, I'm not going to take another run at the damn football because I know you're going to pull it away yet again and we're not going to share. So I do believe in sharing, and I've seen it work at other studios. Bethesda gets an immense benefit from sharing between their project lines. But Bethesda has Todd Howard, who leads every project and can force this sharing to occur. And that can build culture that leads to better sharing. You cannot exist in a situation where one project is imagining a future of sharing and keeps signing up to try, and the other project doesn't have any interest in doing that. If you do not believe in sharing, I'll say this. 4 sprinters can run 400 meters faster than 1 can, and shipped is the best feature a system can have. If you do believe in sharing, I give you permission to be skeptical if you live in a world where you've been burned before by the other projects around you. Be cautious. Don't keep running at that football because there's a reasonable chance it's going to get pulled away from you again. Ultimately, I guess this has turned into a rant. I believe that sharing is incredibly valuable. You don't need to run the same race over and over again. Build upon what came before you. But if your project does not exist within a culture that is going to be supportive of that sharing, be very careful because ultimately you could be wasting your time and wasting the time of your team. Okay, I'm done mixing every metaphor known to mankind into some sort of metaphor stew. If you found this useful or entertaining, hit that thumbs up, share it with someone else. I'll see you soon. Thank you.